There we go. The much anticipated Armchair Botanist Forum today. Tiana is going to be talking about her wonderful trip to the Philippines this past January with our ongoing National Science Foundation grant work in the Philippines. So I'm excited to hear this as well because we haven't she hasn't spilled too many stories yet. So this will be new for all of us. So I hope you all enjoy.
All right, sweet. It's good to see some familiar names, and I see some names that are not so familiar. So welcome to the Armchair Botanist Forum. As y'all know, this is to help support and engage and talk with y'all that are helping us digitize specimens, but also just for public information, these are recorded and you'll be able to see them after the fact on the Armchair Botanist website at fwbg.org. And are there any questions? Because I know Ashley often starts off with the questions for the program. Are there any questions anyone has about armchair botany? We're a small group, so if you'd like, you can unmute. All right, super. Well, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I'm leaving that box open. As well. And Ashley will help monitor as well, and she's not afraid to interrupt me. So, well, welcome. So I'm the Director of Herbarium Collections here at the Philecology Herbarium of the Botanical Research Institute of Texas at the Fort Worth Botanic Garden. Yes, it's a mouthful, but most of you know me. And today I'm actually going to give you a presentation that was advertised under the title, Tales of a Botanical Odyssey in the Philippines. Thank you, ChatGPT, for that title, based off the abstract. However, let me make sure, if I were to give it an alternate title, or maybe two, then I would give it these two titles. I would call it, well, what does a herbarium in Fort Worth, Texas have to do with plant research in the Philippines? One. And then I would maybe also call it From Point A in the Philippines to Point Z in Texas. How do we collect, preserve, transport, and import herbarium specimens over 8,000 miles around the globe? So what you should expect to hear today, this is also sort of my outline slide, is a little bit about two projects, one that's current and ongoing, and one historical project that we've had here at the Botanical Research Institute of Texas. And with that, we're going to pop into it. Please, if I use acronyms, there are quite a few in the presentation, and I'll try to define them ahead of time. But if I use acronyms or names that you don't understand or that you're not aware of what they mean, please throw your question into the chat. All right, so first off, a little bit about the Philecology Herbarium. All of you, I think, on here know a bit about us, but we have about 1.45 million specimens here in our herbarium of preserved plants, lichens, bryophytes, what else do we have? Algae, we have slime molds, many other groups and organisms that are preserved in similar ways, even if they're not quite plants. But we have a large facility that is purpose-built for holding these specimens here. And we have a long legacy. So the organization was actually established in, let's see, it was 1987. In 1991, we opened to the public on the east side of downtown Fort Worth, and we moved to this brand new facility in 2011. And what you're looking at here are glimpses of our brand new facility here in Fort Worth, Texas. And just to let you know that although we're here in Texas, our priorities for holding and curating these specimens are global in scope. We do have the majority of our material from the southern United States, especially from Texas. But also our institution has a long history of prioritizing material from biodiversity hotspots around the world. These are areas of the world, habitats that have high diversity. There's often quite a lot left to be uncovered about that diversity, and they're often in at-risk regions, which make them particularly important for us to survey, collect, and to serve as a repository for other people doing those same sorts of studies. And of course, you know, the whole point of the herbarium having this breadth allows us comparative material for people studying any sort of plant here. And don't be scared by all the text on this page. I could have shortened it down a bit, but one of those biodiversity hotspots is the Philippines. And I'm actually going to make you a little dizzy and go back a couple of slides to make sure you know where we're talking about. So we're in the Southeast Asia, And here's the Philippines between 19 north and 15 north. And you can see that it is actually a collection of islands. I think that, I remember reading that there were 7,107 islands that comprise this country. And you're looking at those there. Most of the time I will spend on the talk today will be talking about down in Mindanao and the Visayas area, so the southern Philippines. All right, with that said, here's a bit of the legacy. So we were formed in 1987 to house an orphan collection from Southern Methodist University of about 450,000 specimens. Believe it was in 1991, our second director came on board, and that director was named Cy Somer. Our first director was William Mahler. So when Cy came on in about, I believe, 1991, around then, he brought with him a major project that he'd been working on, and it was the Philippine Flora Project. This was a project that at the time, when it was initiated in 1990, was a collaboration between the Philippine National Herbarium and the Bishop Museum in Hawaii, which is where Cy Somer was. Since I moved over to Brit in 1991, that project came along with him. And among others that helped lead that project here while it was at Brit, there was Cy Somer, there was Benjamin Stone, who you can see pictured in the very top image, top central black and white image, and there was John Pipoli, who took it on at the end. But this whole project for the Philippines, that was a collaboration with Dr. Domingo Madulid at PNH, at the Philippine National Herbarium, had these goals. It was to document the remaining flora across the whole country. So there is, reportedly very little of the original forest cover left in the Philippines. And so that goal was intended to address that fact, to also strengthen the infrastructure of that national herbarium, that national museum, to support being a repository for these studies. And then lastly, to produce a comprehensive flora of the native and naturalized species of the Philippines. That huge set of goals for a highly biodiverse region of the world. And so that project was funded by various agencies. And specifically, the inventory part of that project was given the name the Philippine Plant Inventory. And that one started in about 1991 and ran through about 1997. It was funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation, by USAID, and others. And it resulted in about 23,000 specimens that are deposited today in the Brit Herbarium, with duplicates distributed, and these are a few of the acronyms I was mentioning, at the Philippine National Herbarium, the Bishop Museum in Hawaii, the Kew Botanic Gardens in England, Leiden in the Netherlands, and US, which is at the Smithsonian. But you'll also see duplicates in many other places. Benjamin Stone, who passed away, unfortunately, in 1994, leaving the reins to John Pipoli to take it on from there. He's, again, the one pictured up in the top, and you're actually looking at the photograph of the plant up there. That is a Freycinetia, which is a genus in the Pandanaceae, the Pandanus family. I believe it's the screw pines. I believe that's one of the common names for the family. And that's one of the groups that Dr. Stone worked with. But in 1994, after his passing, there was a Philippine Flora meeting held here at Brit. And you're looking at a photograph from the Brit Libraries and Archives. And I would like to make a mention that we have a wonderfully organized archive for the Philippine Plant Inventory in our library here. I believe a lot of it was done by a volunteer named Ruth Ginsburg in the early 2000s, perhaps. And the library is open by appointment. So I hope any of you that might be more interested in this would like to come and visit the collection. It's not all digitized, but it is accessible. Just to show you an example here, this is one of the specimens. You've seen many of these herbarium sheets that are dried and pressed plants attached to a sheet of paper. And here is a zoom in of that label. This was collected on the Philippine Plant Inventory, which I will abbreviate to PPI. And you can see up at the top, this was one of the earlier collections. This was 1992 still. So that header doesn't actually even mention Brit, but it does mention the Bishop Museum and the University, or the Philippine National Museum. You can see BC Stone, that's the botanist I've been talking about. You can see a PPI number, and you can see some of the descriptors that appear on these labels. And down at the very bottom, you can see the identification of the plant. And then on the right, you can see DUP and number. Now, this is fascinating because I think we've talked about in this group before making plant collections and how from one collection event, a collection of a single species in space and time, you may make multiple duplicates. They all get identical labels and they get distributed around the world. That's what I mean by duplicates. And so in this case, I mentioned earlier, 23,000 unique collections. Multiply that by 7. I think they were aiming for 7 to 10 duplicates. I mean, that's a huge number in terms of the effort to collect and preserve all of these things. When I start talking a little bit about our current Philippine project and the trip Ashley was mentioning in January, you'll get an idea of what work goes into making that happen. And then I'd like to point out that these specimens, whatever we've already digitized, are available online at that website, portal.torqueherbaria.org. You can do searches for them. But I'm very excited. He's on the call and his camera's on. So if you're looking at the participant list, we have a brand new employee. We have a brand new employee named Craig Meyer. Craig, you can wave hello. Yay. So Craig is coming on here in the Philecology Herbarium, funded by a separate National Science Foundation grant to digitize holdings from Asia that we have here in the herbarium. So he's the lead digitizer for that project. Many of you on here have been working with the Torch Project, another National Science Foundation funded project to digitize Texas and Oklahoma specimens. But we'll soon start ramping up to try to recruit people to work specifically on Asian material. So if any of you are interested in getting involved, please send an email to herbarium@fwbg.org or herbarium@brit.org. So we'll have Craig present in the future about what's going on with that project, but we'll have a lot of this other material digitized, hopefully, with his leadership. All right, so now, and again, I promise after these first few slides, most of the rest is just images and some stories. So here's another picture. Here's a slide talking about the current project that we have in the Philippines. So this is the Plant and Lichen Survey of the Southern Philippines, PLSSP. You'll see that on the labels, but I won't use that acronym. It's too long. But this is also funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation. It was originally funded in 2018 and has currently got an end date of 2024. It involves expeditions to the Philippines, collection and inventory of material. I think I mentioned earlier that we'll be in the Southern Philippines primarily for this project. It involves graduate student support. So we have 2 graduate students currently here at TCU and at UT Arlington that are completing studies with lichens and then with blueberries, Asian blueberries. So that's respectively Yvonne Carino and Maverick Tamayo. So one day we'll have them on here so you can hear about them, hear from them. And then the goal of this project is also to put all these records online and images of these online to contribute to other existing resources in the Philippines already, most notably one that if any of you have ever Googled or done work to look at plants in the Philippines, you will have come across a wonderful resource called Co's Digital Flora, and that's led by Peter Pelser, Julie Barcelona, and many others. I apologize if I've forgotten any. I believe Dan Neckarant too. And this NSF project has two institutional leads. It's got Britt as one and the University of North Carolina, Wilmington as another, with Peter Fritsch and Darren Pennies leading those 2 respectively. But as we get into more of the photographs, which come next, you'll see that this is a really collaborative project. And there are many PIs, many participants, and it would not work without all the people that are involved. And it's a lot of people. Unfortunately, I won't name everybody because I won't have the time, but I do want to acknowledge that this is just a hugely collaborative and wonderful project where I personally have had the opportunity to meet many people, and I think a lot of new networks and connections have been made. If you want to hear more about that, there's a website up here, and I can throw that in the chat, or I'll throw that in the description when we put this up on YouTube. Does anyone have any questions for me so far about any of those 2 projects? All right, well, if you do, please put it in the chat, or you're welcome to unmute yourself. I'm not offended to be interrupted. All right, so here's where the pictures come in, and this is the second part of the talk. So this is from point A to point Z, and I use all 26 letters of the alphabet because I feel like it takes that many steps. I think it's more than that, but I didn't want to start getting into the AZ and all that. So here's what we're talking about, and this is not the trajectory we took, but just a direct line between Fort Worth and down in the Philippines in Davao. Actually, I think I use that for Davao. It is 8,000 something odd miles. So huge distance. To just physically get there, I don't have pictures really of this too much, but it takes 2 days. You know, calculating time change, I have pictures that I took when I got on the airplane in Fort Worth and when we got to the university in Bukidnon in the Philippines. And it was 2 days. It was about 2 days of continuous travel. That does include, you know, layovers and things of that nature. 4 airplanes, a bus. I think that's the only sorts of transport we took, but it was a bit of a blur. So really intense effort to get down there. And so the other slides you'll see succeeding this one are really going to be talking about these 4 things: collection, preservation, transport, and curation. Specimen collection. Okay, so you are all dealing with, you know, the end product. Most of you have been seeing the end product. Either you're researching it or you've been helping us transcribe and digitizing it, making it discoverable. But this specimen collection, absolutely impossible without the major partners, the lead partners, the partners in the Philippines, which is Central Mindanao University, the 2 PIs there, being Dr. Victor Amoroso and Dr. Fulgent Coritico. And I will call that university CMU for Central Mindanao University, in case I repeat that again. The photograph that you're looking at down there at the bottom is the collection team for one portion, one leg of the trip, one locality where we were collecting. So you can see it is huge. It is a huge logistical undertaking to move people, arrange for food, all these things for so many people, any one of these places. And I'm not really going to talk too much about that. But our project lead there at CMU is also Joey Lagumbay. So Joey is phenomenal. And I should say the full team at SEBRUM, which is the institute at CMU that supports this project. It's pretty incredible. So anyway, now we're starting to get a little bit more narrow and focused, but the whole team is divided into taxonomic groups, into the individuals that are collecting one particular group of organism. And those are the seed plants, the ferns, the bryophyte teams, and the lichen teams. And I've got a small picture up at the top right. All the team members were given lanyards. It's part of a security protocol indicating which team they were working on. So you can see mine up there in the top, and it's got all the various sponsors, and it's got my name in there because I was Seed Plants 1. That was the team I was assigned to. Each of those collection teams is responsible for these different roles that I listed below. There's the data recorder, essential, right? Because otherwise you have a dried press specimen, you have some photographs, but you have no other data, scientifically useless. You've got the photographer, you've got an individual who is responsible for collecting leaf tissue material for each collection. You've got collector, I should have put S's, so the people that are actually doing the sampling and grabbing the plant. The spotter, the people who are actively walking around trying to find flowering and fruiting material that hasn't already been sampled. And then, of course, everyone is a botanist. And again, these roles sort of overlap, trying to identify them and put names on them now. Often in the field, you don't get a name on it straight away. And I think we've discussed that in this group before as well, that the name is often the least important part because you don't, because with all the other data and with a good specimen, you should hopefully be able to figure out what it is in particular, or especially, or because of reference to other herbarium collections and publications. So here we go. All right, so some photographs. So I promise this is kind of the less text heavy portion of the presentation. But the actual sampling, right? So the physical activity of collecting the material of cutting the plant. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes the plants are terrestrial and they're low, herbaceous, and you can simply take your photographs, dig it out of the soil. Again, I'm not mentioning things like conservation and permission yet, but sometimes it's easy, right? It's an easy plant to collect. Sometimes it's super convenient, and you've got something like this orchid up here that is an epiphyte on the trunk of another tree, so it's at eye level and it's easy to collect as well. But then sometimes you're looking at a picture of me staring up into the canopy. You've got some really cool flowering material that's way up high in the canopy. And what do you do there? Well, you've got pruning poles. So in the middle image here, you're looking at Nico, who is part of Team 1 at Sea Plants 1, and he is climbing a tree. And then Noe is holding a set of pruning poles. So these are telescoping poles with a pruner head at the top. And in order to get those things that are high up in the canopy, you've these are, I think, 15-foot poles once it's assembled. And we couldn't quite reach them. So Nico had to climb up the other tree to try to then be handed the pruning poles to try to reach that thing that was up in the canopy. So the investment and time in making a collection like this is huge. And I will say also, one of the other standard tools people will have collecting out here will be binoculars, because again, see that back, you can see with the camera that the backlighting is really hard to see up there. And so there are many of these woody plants with flowers and fruits that are on top of the canopy, but you can barely see them. So binoculars are important. And sometimes, though, you go through all the effort of using these pruning poles to pull something down to realize, well, it's nothing significant, or you already collected it. So a lot of investment and time into each one of these collections. And then I've got a picture there of Noe, who's holding the pruning pole in the middle, but he's holding another member of the Pandanaceae, that same family, the screw pine family that Ben Stone studies. Umbrellas, super useful tool in the field because it's often raining. And I'll talk about that with a few photographs in a minute. But it's also, if it's not raining, it might be super sunny and it's hot. So it also helps diffuse the light if you're taking pictures. So umbrellas are essential and useful objects. I realize I'm talking rather fast, so I'll try to slow down just a bit, but are there any questions or comments anyone wants to make? I have a video in here, and the point of this video, I don't know if the sound will come through, but it's not essential, is I just wanted to show you the different habitats we're collecting in. So I was talking about these woody plants high up in the canopy. One of the sites we visited this past January, so all these pictures that I've shown you so far, except for the ones from the library archives, are ones I've taken and are from the same expedition to different sites. So you saw how tall that canopy was in the prior slide. What you're looking at now, we're on the island of Dinagat, just north of the main island of Mindanao, and you are looking at a pygmy forest that's high elevation. So you've got this, this mist down in here, this fog down in here, and hopefully you can see some of the difficulties in collecting. So let's see if we can play that. Can you hear it? So you're looking, sorry if I'm making you dizzy, but you're looking at carnivorous plants there down on the ground. So there's the inflorescence. That's a flower of the genus Nepenthes. All right. Oh, good. Thank you, Denise, for telling me. All right. Yeah. So y'all probably couldn't hear that, but hopefully you got the idea that, we're traipsing around in this area. And I say traipsing, we're trying to be careful because we don't want to damage this, but it's, this forest is, a meter and a half, and makes it a lot simpler to collect some things. And it's pretty fascinating, the sorts of soils that it's growing on. And the species you can find up here in this elfin, this pygmy forest that you find growing larger down below. Are they the same species? Are they different? So these are the kinds of things, the kinds of questions that some of the research botanists working on this can try to answer using these specimens after the fact. I wish I could rewind it to just the spot, but some of the video just there was actually showing carnivorous plants growing terrestrially right here. And they're pretty fascinating, and they were flowering. So pretty incredible, incredible. And apologies, I am letting some people in the room. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that video to give you an idea of one of the, let's see, habitats. Oh, hold on, let me try to progress one image. Ah, there we go. Oh, bear with me. There we go. All right, so hopefully that gave you some idea of how we're actually sampling the specimens. Here, this is the equally important part, because one without the other it makes it not a scientific specimen and not useful for our purposes, but the data collection. And every team, so Seed Plants 1, which is the team pictured here, has a data recorder. That's the person who is responsible for filling out a data sheet that is printed on Write in the Rain paper, which is paper that shouldn't allow ink to smudge, that will survive the rain. And that's Peter Fritsch, who's the PI here at Britt for this project. And he is got his handy, oh goodness, Trapper Keeper? It's not a Trapper Keeper, but that device that's holding all the data sheets in there, and he's taking data down, observations he's making by holding up the sample that someone has collected and brought to him, with the assistance of the whole team, who's identifying the material or telling him how tall the tree was that it was collected from, and he's making observations about the color of the fruit, color of the flower, whether there's latex, if he can see any other things he might be able to see with a hand lens. I've got one around my neck right now. You can see a lot of the people in here will have their hand lenses around too. This is one of our really great sites. And what's great here is you can actually see the full process at this big image on the left. You can see the camera and the photography background here in the foreground. You can then see the data collection by Peter Fritsch with his data sheet. Across from him is Jen, and she is actually sampling tissue samples from the individual plant that's about to be pressed. And then up at the back, you can see the pressing. The pressing of the specimen. On the right-hand side are just to show you what these data sheets look like. They are pretty extensive. They go from describing the plant to describing the habitat to describing the administrative region area in which we're collecting, to also include coordinates. So down in the bottom, you're looking at the GPS unit that I was holding, from which we were recording coordinate data. All right, so specimen collection photography. So in that prior image, you saw that little black background set up with the camera, and you're seeing Seed Plants 1 is up on the right and Seed Plants 2 is down on the left. That's Darren Penny's on his knees from Seed Plants 2, arranging a specimen with a scale bar on a black background so that he can take that photograph. On the right-hand side, and you can see all the prep work behind him. I'll show you another slide in a minute, but some of the earlier images you saw, we were actually pressing the plants in the field, photographing them in the field. When it's raining, we don't stop collecting because you have to take advantage of being there and having the time to do it. But we bag and drag. So you basically put things in a big plastic bag, you bring them back to somewhere where there is protection, and you start separating, you empty that bag and you start separating out collections that you've made. And then you basically set up like a conveyor belt line kind of system where they're separated into unique collections. The DNA is sampled, the numbers assigned, the data are collected, and the photographs are made. And so the cameras we're using are pretty phenomenal little point and shoot cameras. They're made by Olympus. They're the TG, I think mostly we're using the TG6. They're waterproof as well. And we have little diffusers and have them on macro settings. If you're curious about how we're taking those pictures, I can show those to you in a little bit. Here's an example of the kinds of pictures we're taking. So, and because I got to put this presentation together, I chose to put some of my images from the nutmegs. So this is the genus Nema. These are, this is an example of the kinds of photography we're taking. So down in the bottom left, you can see that's kind of an in situ, the plant as it was standing in the field where it was collected kind of picture. All the rest are more studio style. It is the conditions for taking pictures in situ are just often really difficult. There's lots of things in the way. There's wind movement, there's rain that could damage all your equipment or shake the plant so much that you can't photograph it. So often we try to take them to a protected place to photograph. Sometimes that protected place is under an umbrella because hopefully it's just a bit of rain that's coming through. Sometimes we're bagging and dragging. It's rather difficult to do some of this, and I took lots of images to try to get good ones, but you can have some idea of the types of images we take. All right, tissue collection. So that's Miss Jen over here in the left-hand side, at least my left of the presentation. She's got a piece of blue tape down there, and I'm not sure if you can see very well, but she's got a wipe in her hand, sanitizing between cuts. She's got a blade, some scissors down there. She is taking leaf material from a collection. She is cutting it up finely. She's putting it into a packet with silica gel. So the object of this is to give us quick dried leaf tissue material from a collection that can be used for molecular techniques down the line. And in the succeeding slides, you'll see why it's important that we do this and why we have to do it at this point in time and not rely on simply the dried herbarium specimen later on, which you can extract DNA from. On the right-hand side, you see Jeff Mancera and Darren Pennies. They are actually sorting a lot of these tissue samples. They're replenishing the silica gel so they don't get moldy, so they stay dry, and they're organizing them for shipment to the United States. And there's more about this that I'll show you in a little while. But just to give you some more idea about the difficulties of collecting, and not just the difficulties, but the exciting, the triumphs of collecting. These are some of the different transport systems that we used for people and specimens. In the left, if some of you may be familiar with this is probably the state vehicle, no, the country vehicle of the Philippines. This is a jeepney. So these are transport vehicles that are based off World War II American Jeeps that were left in the Philippines. And they look like a Jeep, an open Jeep with an extension. They're often used for public transport. This one belongs to the university and is really fancy and stored a lot of equipment and people in it as well for transport. There was some boat transport. I think I mentioned Dinagat Island. That was that last video you saw. That island, we had to transport by boat. And if you look carefully in that photograph, you can see there are plastic bags of specimens. So that was another bag and drag day. There's bus travel up at the top. You can see it was very rainy. We were bagging and dragging. So there's clear plastic bags full of collections. We collected by raft. So there's an inland lake on Dinagat Island, Lake Bababu, and you're looking at a raft that was used to collect along the edges of the lake. There's really high or steep slope right against the edge, and unique plants that were growing right off the limestone there, off the karst. And so that access to that raft in that location gave us easier access to some of those plants we wouldn't have found otherwise. And then lastly, at the bottom, my favorite, least favorite, I don't know, when you have a memory that you smile at now, but it was so painful in the moment. So down at the bottom, this is also in Dinagat. We had access to a truck, a dump truck style truck that was used by a mining camp, by a mining organization, and they transported all of us up and down the mountain to that pygmy forest, or to close to that pygmy forest. So you're looking at that truck in the bottom central image, and then to the right of it, you're seeing all the people that were packed in there. And I have to tell you, it was really rough riding, and everyone was laughing, crying, and then screaming every time it went over a bump. And I have a video that I won't show you, but if you'd like to see it in the future, I can do that. But you can see people are carefully holding plants in there. Plants are the priority after going through all the effort of collecting those things. All right, back and forth a bit, but the specimen preservation itself. So field pressing or bagging the collections, I've told you a little bit about that. And you can see this photograph on the right are some of our fern team that are using a field press. So they're sampling the material, cutting it down to an appropriate size to eventually mount on a sheet of paper, putting it in newspapers, numbering it at the time, pressing it in a canvas bound press to squash it flat. Then after that happens for a while, inevitably, if you've got this field press and you're collecting all day, that's going to fill up. So those newspapers, that stack of newspapers that has been pressed that morning, will get removed from the field press. It will get tied in a bundle with twine, and it will be put in a plastic bag. Depending on how we're collecting in the day, if there's trails to collect and we know we're coming right back down the same trail, that bundle of newspapered specimens that's inside a plastic bag will actually get left in the middle of the trail. It will be protected from any further rain because it's in the plastic bag, but there's no point us carrying it as we're going to keep going another few miles down the trail only to bring it back again. So it's left there on the trail, so it's not uncommon to be walking behind another team on the trail and just see little plastic bags all the way, little but big plastic bags along the way. Those specimens in that plastic bag, they're bound tightly, they're in a plastic bag, they're actually treated with alcohol. You'll see some more slides after this one about that. And then steps 4 and 5 happen out of the field. They happen back at the university when we have time to process. And that's to separate and dry the specimens in plant dryers, and then to kind of separate out duplicates and plan on where those specimens are moving to next. So here are a few images. Here are examples of everyone pressing. So that's seed plants. One image is mostly, you can see that's a palm that's being pressed. So often things are huge, right? They're so big that you simply can't fit a palm tree, an example of a palm tree on an 11 by 17 sheet of paper. So for certain plant groups, there are specific ways to collect. Palms, for example, that whole frond is a leaf. And so measurements are taken and recorded in your data sheets. And then the tip of the leaf, the middle section, and the basal section are all collected along with any fruiting or flowering material. That's important because there are diagnostic characters or things you observe in the morphology of the plant that tell you what it is. And those are the important bits to collect. And that's what's happening in newspaper. I mentioned the bag and drag earlier. So these are little yellow individual plastic bags in which collections were placed before they were put in the big plastic bags that you see in the top image over here. And that's Dr. Jun Wen, who is visiting, who was a guest on that last expedition that I also was a guest on and attended, and she's at the Smithsonian. And there's Vanessa Handley, who I'm not even talking about this today, but we are, the team has been collecting fresh and living material as well. All right, I promised to show you the alcohol method. So here's another video. I don't think you'll be able to hear it again, Denise, but I think you'll be able to see it. So let's hit play. So that's the bundle of newspaper, like I mentioned, that was left along the trail. We're now back at camp for the afternoon. He's dousing it with alcohol, isopropyl alcohol probably. And the point of that process is that, for example, I think this leg of the expedition was maybe a 5-night leg. There were no facilities to dry the specimens with plant dryers. So Noe and Nico are putting alcohol in that bag and totally dousing the specimens. So those of you that have participated in mounting plants with us, when you mount some of these Philippine plants, once they get to us and they're all brown, this is why, part of why anyway. The intent behind this process is to inhibit mold growth, insect activity, until it can be taken to a place where the plant can be dried. So that's the process, that's the shake and bake of it. Perfect. All right. So that was in the field. Coming back, so that was, I think, like I said, maybe a 5-night trip. So when we were transported back to the university, this is Aldrin here, who's standing with Peter right next to the plant dryer. So the picture without people in it on the right side, those are 2 plant dryers that are there at the university and used to dry the plants. And on the left-hand side, you can see the specimens themselves stacked inside cardboard before being placed in those plant dryers. So this is the final step of drying. And then, oh, I didn't show a picture of this. After that drying process, the specimens are run through a freezing process there at CMU, at the university, to again inhibit any other insects that might eat the dried plant material. So it's quite a process. Okay, and then after, well, And then actually it's another really lengthy part that continues. So Joey is our project manager there in the Philippines. She is the one that works with Fulgent and Victor to obtain all the export permits. So there's a whole lot of permitting that I didn't talk about even pre-collection. There's a relationship to be developed with some of the communities and the community, the landscape managers that we're working with. So there's that part and permission from them. There's often permission from administrators in the area, government officials. There's also the environmental department permits to get to collect and to transport specimens across any spaces there in the Philippines. Then there's the export permits just to get the specimens out of the Philippines. On our end, I deal with getting the import permits, so the permits from the United States Department of Agriculture and the United States Fish and Wildlife Service that allow us to bring in and to have these materials. In the Philippines, they also have to obtain phytosanitary certificates, which are basically, they have to take the specimens to an official to investigate them, make sure there's no live insects or anything of that nature, soil. And once that gets approved, we can organize the transport of the specimens here to Texas. And that's currently, we've been using DHL. Oh, good question, Lauren. You asked about drying and freezing time. And I don't know, having done it over there, but the drying time, so they're partially dried in the alcohol. I'm trying to think. I want to say it's probably 24 to 48 hours that a specimen stays in the plant dryer there at CMU. And the freezing time, I don't actually remember. I believe it's about a week. I could be wrong about that, but I believe it's about a week. Their freezers don't go down to the same temperatures, I think, that we use here in our freezers here in Texas. And so they keep them in there a longer period of time. But of course, Aldrin's checking these and making sure they're dry, because some things take much longer to dry than other things. On the right-hand side of the picture, you're looking at some of those boxes that came to us from the Philippines. This is what these are called, balikbayan boxes, which is a term about gifts and bringing things back. And they're large 20 by 20 centimeter boxes with specimens filled in them. Jessica back there is super excited as well because they arrived. We're all very excited. They'll get pulled out of those boxes, put in the freezers. Those are our freezers here in Texas behind us, and then brought into the herbarium. That's where this last part kicks in. So this is the specimen curation, and there's a few more pictures to this, but I think we're only about 5 or so slides away from the end of the presentation. So the specimen materials received at BRIT, we're freezing them. They're sorted numerically. The data sheets are transcribed into a collections database. Sometimes we try to do as much of this as we can in the field, but sometimes that's not always possible with the schedule. Once those data are entered into a database, an Excel spreadsheet, we print labels from that Excel spreadsheet. And because remember, we need those data to be attached to the specimens, otherwise they're useless. So those labels are printed on archival quality paper. They're inserted with all the specimens. Many of you have helped us with this process, which is difficult, and there's a lot of material. And these are numerically ordered, these steps, but it's not quite always a straight line. Specimen data are uploaded to our online database. It's that same one I shared earlier that you can search. Not everything is online yet, but we're trying to get there. The BRIT duplicate. So the BRIT specimen's actually mounted and on paper. It is photographed at high resolution, and that joins the digital record online. And the last step, and this is a really important step, is that the diversity is high everywhere, high in the Philippines, and the collaborators that are working on this project have their own respective groups that they are experts in and that they can identify with ease. But there are many, it requires a world's worth of experts to ID all the rest of the material we have. So those additional duplicates are sent to experts around the world to help identify that material. And they're usually gifted to that individual's institution so they can be held in their herbarium then. In fact, we have one that's waiting to go to Sweden that we've just gotten all our export permits and all the collecting permits so we can send with those specimens. So hopefully those will go out next week. But here are some photographs of that process here. You're looking at Rachel Carmichael, who's our project assistant here in Texas on the Philippines project. Rachel is standing in front of, oh, that's probably expedition 1, mounted specimens, and then actually, yeah. And then next to her, you can see there's a whole cabinet open of newspapers. Those are probably the duplicates from expedition 1. In front of her, she's looking at one of those specimens that still has to have a label inserted. She's got plastic bags there that are also some of the DNA samples that she's replacing the silica gel in. And then on the right-hand side, I don't know if there's any of you that are recognizing yourselves in there, but we had a volunteer event to request your help to prepare, in this case, it was for the lichen collections, to prepare the lichen packets for when the boxes arrived and we could insert specimens into those labeled packets. So this is a process that we couldn't have done it in any kind of timely manner without the help of our volunteers. All right, so that was my second to last slide. So this is my last one. Salamat kaayo, which is the sign for thank you very much. These are just a very few people that I'd like to thank for at least the slides I put up here for the work that they represent, but it is really not everyone. Everyone was important, like I mentioned on the team, and I didn't name a fraction of the people that should be mentioned. But Central Mindanao University, the local communities and the elders and the lane managers that gave us access and provided assistance to us, the local government and administrative officials were very helpful in a lot of the places we went, providing transport, providing meals. It was an incredible reception there in the Philippines where we were. And I can't say enough about the people we encountered and worked with, the team that Dr. Victor Amoroso and his team is building there at CMU of botanists in the Philippines that really know what they're doing and have an appreciation and understanding of the flora. And then, of course, these are some of the names of the people that were leading different collecting groups. Peter Fritsch, Darren Pennies, Manuela Del Forno, Victor Amoroso, Fulgent Caritico, Viviana Moncada, who's at Berlin, who's working with lichens. Let's see, Jim Shivak, who's at the California Academy of Sciences, who works with bryophytes. John Brenda from the Missouri Botanical Garden, who works with bryophytes. Jun Wen, her name is misspelled, apologies, there's an extra E in there. June is at the Smithsonian and works with vascular plants. Vanessa Handley, who works with living collections. And then Joey Lagumbay, who's the project lead there in the Philippines. And then, of course, because I'm in Seed Plants One forever. And then the volunteers, of course, thank you for all your help transcribing, digitizing, and working here in the herbarium. Whew. And I got that with 10 minutes to spare. So that's the extent of my presentation. So again, salamat kaayo, and I'm happy to answer questions if you have them. Thanks, Lauren.
Cool. I have a question.
Yeah, what's your question, Ashley? And I'll repeat it.
So where does it go from here? What's next for the Philippines project? Not just the specimens from that expedition, but are there more expeditions or kind of what is it? I mean, maybe we don't know, like.
No, you know, I was a guest participant on this last expedition and work on the project on this end, but so Ashley's question was what's next for the project, not necessarily the specimens per se. And at least from my limited understanding of where the project is going next, there's another expedition that will be planned for May, and that will be expedition 6, I believe. 6 of the 6 major expeditions. There's been smaller expeditions as well. And yeah, so 6 expeditions. And then, of course, we have our 2 graduate students working on that project. So we'll see what sort of things happen there. There are plans and hopes to write another grant to maybe various granting agencies, a proposal to propose continuing work in the Philippines, because it's, I mean, there's so much more work to be done. So I think that summarizes, generally speaking. Yeah. Oh, Denise, I see your question there. So 5-day excursions, we were there 30 days. So part of visa processing in the Philippines, you can be in the Philippines on a tourist visa for 30 days. So typically the expeditions are planned for that length of time so that we don't have the additional costs of getting visa extensions and having to send our passports to the Philippine consulate here in the US and all that good stuff. So usually about 30 days. I stayed a little bit later because I wanted to stay a little later. So I went through the process of getting the visa extension. So if anyone has questions about that, I can answer that too. Lauren says, it truly takes a village. Thank you for sharing the big picture perspective. As a transcription volunteer, I greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Lauren. I wanted to make sure that y'all realize that what you're doing matters, and all of this process, there's a whole lot of people that work on these specimens, and you are included in that trajectory. These specimens are a little bit different because they're born digital. And those data are, well, technically not born digital since we're transcribing, but, and Rachel has done a lot of the transcription, as has Peter, but, so it's a little bit different, and you won't see these specimens in quite the same way as an armchair botanist, but yeah, it gives you the idea of how the work you're doing validates and makes discoverable all the time and effort that's spent in making these collections, which have no, they're priceless. So thank you. All right. Are there any other questions I can answer? When's my next trip? I'm not sure. I had being gone over a month was a long time, so I don't know when I'll personally go on the next trip, but the team will definitely go probably in May of next year. So fingers crossed. We'll see what happens. Thank you all for everything you do, helping us digitize specimens, or helping learn about herbaria and the collections and why they're important. It really matters. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Jean. All right. Are there anything else you want to talk about? Okay.
I think we have one more armchair botanist next month, but we'll probably keep the same format once a month going into 2024. If you have suggestions for presentations, we of course always appreciate that. But I believe we have everyone's email on here, so we'll keep you guys posted for the next month's presentation.
Thanks,
y'all, everyone.
Bye. We'll see you soon. I'm gonna close off the meeting. Bye. Stop recording.